Hello. Welcome to Season XV of the Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, we're watching movies from the 90s and talking about how they fit into the larger picture of 90s horror and how each year from that decade stacks up against the others. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. This season is flying by. We are now kicking off 1998. We're going to do 2 movies from 1998, then we're going to do 2 movies from 1999, and then we're through our critical revisiting of the 90s. Seems like we just got started.
It does. Sad day. But also we're getting away from like those 100 episode seasons, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah. I have a feeling we may tack an extra one or two on at the end of this, because we got some things to revisit, I think, at this point. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. This season, we are going through each year of the 90s and watching 2 horror movies to try and find the hidden gold. And that means we are not doing any sequels or remakes. We are not doing any movies that we have talked about before, and we're not doing any movies that made over $100 million at the box office. So the idea is we're trying to find the good 90s horror movies that you might have missed. So far, we've been successful every now and then.
And we can also tell you that gold from the 90s isn't from Leprechaun. That's not happening.
Or any of the other fairy tale remakes that may or not have anything to do with the story they're based on. Pinocchio's Revenge. Yeah. But yeah, so in 1998, well, in 1997, we talked about how it felt like we were kind of getting away from like the gratuitous sequels a little bit. Yeah. But then I started looking at the movies that we weren't allowed to talk about from 1998, and we have Bride of Chucky, Children of the Corn 5, Fields of Terror, The Dentist 2, Halloween H2O 20 years later, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, which is just a year after the original, but Psycho, which is a remake, and then Witchcraft 10, Mistress of the Craft. So I feel like those were all a little bit higher budget, though. Like I feel like all of those were very much meant to be like theater experiences, not like direct to VHS. So maybe that's something. But
do you think
definitely doubling down on the 80s?
Yeah, and maybe like in 97. No, maybe it was because in 1996 Leprechaun 4 came out. And that was one in space, and they saw how well that did. And so every studio was like, hey, let's start remaking or posting some sequels.
Game changer.
Yeah. Leprechaun 4, man. That's where the gold is.
Yeah. And it may have been, too, that the VHS revolution was a little bit in the rearview mirror. Like around this time, weren't we getting close to DVDs, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was definitely coming late.
Yeah.
It may have come out sooner, but not to our class, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I didn't know what a DVD was till I was a full grown man.
Yeah.
But anyway. Yeah. So this week, the movie that we did decide to do is called Dark City. And this is a movie I had seen before and enjoyed, but I didn't really think of it as horror so much.
Yeah.
So I want to talk more about that, but this was one that you chose, and I was just curious, had you seen this movie before, or did you know much about it?
I had not seen it before, did not know much about it.
Full disclosure, it's been like 4 weeks since I watched it because of all the travel for various family crises that have happened recently. Yeah, anyway, and so I'm refreshing my memory from my notes here. But this is a movie that I had seen before. It's one that I saw a long time ago. And you know that I'm very, I guess, more traditionally a fan of sci-fi than you, I think it's safe to say.
Yeah.
And so this was one that I had found sort of through that avenue, not through looking for horror movies. But going back to it and looking for horror aspects was kind of fun. And so we have some stuff we can get into on that. But first, I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then you can do your fun fact, which is making a return this week. And then we will get into the John Murdoch would have looked 100 times more normal if he just had like an inch of sideburns details.
2 weeks in a row. Everyone, come on.
In 1998, New Line Cinema brought us Dark City, a neo-noir sci-fi horror film written and directed by Alex Proyas, whose name you might remember from our review of The Crow a few weeks ago. Dark City tells the story of a man who wakes up with no memory in a city where the sun never rises. As increasingly strange things start to happen, he's forced to confront everything he thinks he knows about himself and the dark forces who are in control. This movie was made on a budget of $27 million and made right around $27 million at the box office. It can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video.
Perfect.
What did you learn about this movie?
Just a real quick little thing. I'm not alone as to why I was lost in this, and I got this from IMDb if y'all want to see, but that's tied into Prime, so sue them. Anyways, this was deliberately made to give the viewers a feeling of confusion about the period of time, the confusion with darkness and light and all that. That was on purpose, so much so that New Line Cinema forced Alex Proyas to include an opening narration by Kiefer Sutherland, which gives away several plot reveals, but he had to do it to basically let the viewers know what they're getting themselves into. But then when the director's cut came out, however many years later, they removed it. Also, in the recording we had, or the one I watched, didn't have it. Just thought I'd say it. But those are my facts.
So you basically had no guardrails to keep you on track on this one. It was just as confusing as they felt like they could make it.
Yes. 100%. And also it was difficult to follow, especially early on before you're used to like how it was edited.
Yeah.
So like it was legit. Like, I think I started this one and I was drunk or drinking, and I was like looking at my course and I'm like, this is wrong. Like, is this like tainted? Because I am confused here. And then I stopped and I was like, let me just put on Funny Games. But then because I had some beers in me, I was just getting mad watching Funny Games. Because I was like, I just want to fight these guys even more. I get a little feisty,
Then you just start leaving your front door open, hoping somebody tries to walk
out in the dark with shotgun. So like I just turned it off. I was just like, nah, it's not tonight, man. Not tonight. But then when I went to rewatch it within my 24-hour allotted time, which is bullshit, It's digital. Right. Anyway, I was like, oh yeah, you were just super drunk or drinking. But anyway.
This movie, I think, was very influential in ways that I've not read people admit that it is. And you talked about how last week how Funny Games was like super influential for home invasion horror.
Yeah.
I think this was super influential in different genres. So I think that you can point to a lot of things in Shutter Island, The Matrix, and Inception that all are just real obvious pulls from this movie. Yeah. Whether it be like technique, storytelling, conceptual, whatever. I definitely saw, because I was not as familiar with those movies, I guess, the first time I saw this, or wasn't thinking about, movie making and influences as much. But it just was really, really blatant to me with all of those, that there were things in this that were kind of the seed of something that showed up in those movies.
It's a really good point. I mean, obviously Matrix, I could see that 100%, but the Inception one for sure, because that is the same thing by design. There was too many of those anachronisms in there, and it just confused the hell out of you the whole time.
Yeah, and like the way like the landscape could shift and stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah. And then
did they steal an idea?
Oh, I mean, I think a lot of people took a lot of, and even down to like the way that they would say Mr. Murdoch reminded me so much of Mr. Anderson from The Matrix. Like there were just a billion things. The whole time I felt like I was just taking notes on like, yeah, this is basically a prequel to, the way that this was handled in
You're like,
this
where
other
are the
movie.
guns getting here?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, all that said, I think the movie making for this was much more in the tradition of like a noir mystery than direct horror. Like even the way they use music, the cadence of the dialogue, the visuals, and even the way they would like set up shots and stuff, like felt like kind of a noir mystery, or I guess neo noir, because it had CGI and that's how you tell the difference or something. But this one did kind of get back into that big ambitious CGI effects too, and it was I would say ambitious is one of the words that you would have to use to describe this movie accurately.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I definitely think so. Like, I think for me, like throughout the whole film, if I had stopped like 3/4 of the way through, I would have just not liked it at all. And for some reason, I think just finishing it, like maybe answer some questions for me. I don't know, but it just kind of worked out. But it makes me feel better knowing that they purposely made it like a little helter-skelter, like a little confusing, and that I wasn't just that dense. Because I was really trying, because I went into Event Horizon thinking, like, that kind of thing. And so I was like, I was fooled by this, and this is the 90s. And so like, I know it doesn't involve space, but it's, it's a different style than what we, and so, it's like, I'm in, like, let's do this. And then.
So one that I left out that I should have said, Memento was another one that I think had a lot of, some things that it you could point back to this as the inspiration for. But that said, one thing I wanted to get into in this episode is talking about how this fits into the horror landscape, because, you could make the case like, oh, this is definitely a sci-fi movie, and it is. And you could say this is like a noir mystery thriller, and it is. But from the horror perspective, it really, I think, only makes sense in the psychological vein, like very similar to Shutter Island. And one of the things that made that effective, or that made it sort of fall on the more horrific side of some of these other genres, is just how kind of confusing it was. And it wasn't just that you as the viewer were having to try and decide what was real and what wasn't, and who was accurate and who wasn't, but also the character was. So you're along for the ride with John Murdoch this whole movie. You're trying to figure it out just the same way he is, but also you have like that empathy because you're also trying to put the story together. So then when they put him in danger, you also just kind of naturally feel like you're a little bit in danger. Like there's that identifying with the main character that the psychological aspect brings to it, that I think can be really effective from a horror perspective, because it just puts you in that same kind of confused survival mode that the character is for the whole movie.
Yeah, that's kind of like what we were saying with Funny Games a little bit too.
Yeah.
Putting yourself in those shoes. And this is just like a different, like we said with when we're watching like, Halloween, or like, this is a different style of doing the same concept of putting yourself in the shoes of, or putting yourself in the film, is what I generally kind of say. And it's, it was a good way to do it.
And I think one of the other things that kind of worked on the horror level was the chase aspect. Like the fact that the aliens in the suits were out to get him, just because he couldn't ever really just sit down and try to figure out what was going on. It was this constant running away and trying to figure out who was working for them versus who actually had his best interests at heart. So there was like that distrust, but also just like the very real physical danger of those guys who were trying to get him. And I think sort of the culmination of that, or the one scene that I thought was really more horror, was when some of the chase stuff that was going on. And there's that scene where he's hanging onto the ledge, kind of out the window, and then like that creepy child comes and just starts biting his fingers.
Yeah.
That was pure nightmare fuel. Like everything about that was just like, what in the hell is happening right now? And why is that image now in my mind?
Yeah. And who was the person who thought of this?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For some of those scenes like that, it's just like, who conceived this horror?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think that's actually in my opinion, the best example of horror with this, not including like the last like 20 minutes or so. Some of those scenes I think were a little dungeon-esque, like pretty terrifying. But yeah, I think that's prime example. But I mean, like you're saying, like not like even when you're like certain horror films that we watched over years, there's times where they'll add like a random like funny scene or a random joke or something like that, and like part of me thinks like that's good because I needed a break. And other times if I didn't need a break, it's like, oh, that's just bad, poor timing kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And that's just me as a viewer, but putting yourself in his shoes, like you can't take a break, like you can't stop basically. And it's like, right. And how do you collect your thoughts? Like multiple times throughout the day when I'm working, when I'm getting overwhelmed, I literally walk out to my car and I sit in my car for like 10-15 minutes just to like not hear anything, or like I'll call my wife or something just to kind of, clear my head. And I couldn't imagine being in his shoes trying to figure out everything that's going on and not being able to like actually like sit down and think for a sec, but that's the real horror of it.
Yeah, and I mean that action is definitely pointed at you as the viewer too, to make sure that you are distracted from being able to really think through everything that's happening. And so, yeah, a lot of that I think was pulled off pretty effectively. One thing that I think was less effective in this one is something you talked about last week with Funny Games, where we're kind of talking about how there were no like overtly bad special effects that pulled you out of the moment. Can't quite say the same thing for this one, because some of that CGI was cores heavy rough.
Yeah. Yeah. Like this was like because I watched Funny Games first, but this was like, oh, we are in the 90s.
Yeah, right.
That's just what I thought, and it's kind of like what we expect,
Yeah. Well, and like we talked about with Event Horizon, I think the budget was like 60 million, and the CGI had some rough moments in that one, but overall it mostly wasn't like super distracting. Whereas in this one, the budget was less than half that, and it really struggled in some cases. Yeah. Like the whole, like when he was using his brain powers or whatever, like it just kind of looked like unfinished Pixar farts or something.
Yeah. It did.
And it was just a little distracting because it was goofy, but yeah.
I think yet again that's a very prime example of just CGI can hurt it a little bit. Like, and it's also like almost, in my opinion, and I may have said this on one of the ones before, but like it's almost a little heartbreaking because it's like, just if you guys just waited a little bit longer, not saying I don't have any beef with CGI nowadays, but like the early days, like it was rough as hell, and so it's like if you waited just a little bit, like maybe some of these, maybe what you envisioned for this film could have actually come into place, and maybe that's what they wanted, but I don't know. When you put a little higher budget on it, I just can't see that being the case. But it's amazing how much CGI can really like make or break a film,
even if it's and special effects in general.
Well, yeah, but yeah, specifically with CGI, just the early days, man. And what's funny too is sometimes I love like the terrible CGI. If I'm maybe having fun with this, whatever horror film we're watching, it's like, yeah, that's part of it.
Like Mars Attacks. You can...
Yeah. Like that's part of the film. But with this, it's like if we like the concept of this film was super cool, like super dark and gritty and like comic book. Like that's all I thought. Like every scene early on was like, this is a comic book like picture. The way that they're doing it. Once I figured that out. It's just like, gosh, we get the CGI effect. You guys explain a little bit to old dumb Tom here, then we'd be fine. But
yeah, I agree with you on like the comic book aspect or like that noir feel. Like it really leaned heavily into that, and clearly was kind of tipping its hat at that genre as well. Yeah. But I think they pulled in definitely some horror influences enough so that it was interesting to talk about from that perspective.
Yeah, I think absolutely they did. Without a doubt, like we've watched way less horror specific films for this podcast than like I think that this one is like ooh,
There were
I
some
was gonna say sci-fi, but I was gonna say like noir, like sci-fi horror film. Yeah, I don't know if we've ever had that, but
yeah, and very psychological. And I just
100%.
it was one that was kind of like in my head for a while after I watched it too, which is always the sign of like a good psychological horror movie.
Yeah,
But
I could see that.
Yeah, I was waiting for him after. I guess kind of the big like climax of the movie is that the doctor injects a different set of memories in which he's weaved in lessons about the bad guys and how their machinery works, and also training on how to be a better psychic and stuff. And so then he gives the injection, and then like he wakes up and wrecks shop. And I was just like waiting for him to say, "I know kung fu" as soon as his eyes open. But
that would be amazing. He started getting up and just started like, yeah, that'd be dope. Yeah.
Very, very Matrixy feeling. But
did Kiefer Sutherland's accent remind you of anyone? Because I got someone who it reminded me of.
Okay, I'll hear it.
It's about this little Irish orphan named Arthur Knight. Are you aware of? Do you know who Arthur Knight is? He's been in the news quite a bit lately. It's technically Nicholas Rossi, the guy from America that like fled over to England, and he got really fat and like he did some bad shit. So he's like on a breathing, like he has like oxygen, but I'm pretty sure like all that's relatively phony. But he spoke just like Kiefer Sutherland, like
yeah,
you know, cadence,
like that very like labored breathing kind of
And because of that, every time Kiefer Sutherland got out of it, I noticed immediately because like all I could hear was Nicholas Rossi's like as Arthur Knight talking. It just tripped me out.
Anyway, yeah, this movie, I enjoyed watching it. I guess the thing that I'm still not sure on though was like, did you actually enjoy this movie, or did you just think it was more like interesting because it was weird?
I thought it was interesting because it was weird. I think now that we've talked about it, it makes me want to go back and watch it. And because it was recently rented within 24 hours, I can do that. Yeah. Just to like kind of, I don't know, get a better grasp on it. I think for me, like I just kind of kept getting. It was almost like watching, you know, foreign film with that only has subtitles and like looking away for like, you know, 2 minutes and then coming back. You're like, whoa, what just happened? Like, because you can't hear the reference. So right. I think it was more so kind of confused. And then like the way my brain works is like, well, if I'm going to watch something where I'm going to be confused, like let's make it like Jacob's Ladder or so, you know, like something like that, which was very similar. But no, I think I enjoyed it based off of certain aspects, like comic book style, you know, the noir. I just have a place in my heart for those, I guess. I don't know why. Was Roger Rabbit, was that a noir film?
Yeah, I think that would kind of fit, but
probably why.
Yeah, like a jokey version or something.
Yeah, but
yeah.
So that was specifically why. I think, you know, this is, you know, hit or miss. I'll definitely watch it again, but I didn't hate it by any means. I was just like this would have been good for us to watch when if we had the cabin this past weekend.
Yes.
So you could like say, hey, that's why they're saying that.
Yeah. Along those lines with Roger Rabbit, it kind of makes me wonder what was going on in like, I guess, popular culture around this time, because I feel like I see a lot of influences from this, like to The Matrix or to Memento or to like other dark movies around the time. And before this, we had like The Crow and Spawn, which were also like very dark, kind of gritty movies. And it feels like that's really where things were going in the 90s. And I don't know, like the late 90s to me just feel very like self-serious. And, you know, you think about the difference of like, okay, mid-90s movie, Scream, late 90s movie, I Know What You Did Last Summer, or right. Like and it was only like a year apart, but yeah. I feel like there was something in the public appetite for really kind of darker, grittier, urban decay, maybe a little bit psychological, dangerous, kind of what is the impact of technology on all of this. Like, there was just something going on at the time that I feel like we're starting to see reflected in the movies from around the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. What I was wondering is, when did Detroit, like, I mean, you know, we know Detroit nowadays is not the same, you know, city that it was, you know, because it's Motor City. There's a lot of money, a lot of stuff going on, and then that started to collapse. And I don't know if the 90s had anything to do with it, but, you know, it is soon after is when, you know, factories started moving out and stuff. So I wonder if, like, certain aspects of that, maybe corporations, you know, going across seas to, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that maybe also the people were just like, I'm sick and tired. No, it's kind of left over from the 80s. I felt like the 80s were kind of dark and gritty. And then like the 90s was almost just like a copy, hence all the sequels we got, you know, and so they just try to make it even more dark and grittier. But
well, and I feel like there were also a lot of kind of like alien apocalypse type things going on, because you had Independence Day in 96, then you had this in 98 and The Matrix in 99. And with all of those, it's kind of like this malevolent alien force that is either trying to or already has completely subjugated humanity. And so that's kind of a weird big trend. And I wondered if, like, the uncertainty around technology and Y2K on the horizon was starting to, like, kind of make people receptive to scary sci-fi or something.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't know. Anyway, just some idle thoughts for the end of the episode that you can choose to edit out if you want.
I'm not going to do it.
But there's definitely some stuff going on. You can see it reflected in the movies. And I think that we're, I don't know, hitting a point where we've got healthy budgets and good filmmakers who are doing horror things. And so we've had a string of ones that I thought were pretty good. And we'll see if that continues next week when we get into our second movie from 1998, and then go back and see where 98 stacks up against the other years for the movies that it gave us.
Yeah. What are we coming back to next week?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think we've decided yet.
I did.
Oh, did you?
Sleepy Hollow.
Wait, but you did Dark City.
Yeah, but... Oh, right. My bad.
It's okay.
But it's okay, because I get to change it now. Editor, cut this out.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com. Or hit us up on the IG. That's what the kids call Instagram. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.